In the outer reaches of known space, far beyond the mapped colonies of humankind, the star Varelia 9 burned with a blue light so intense that its brilliance painted the nearby moons in hues of frozen sapphire. Around that star circled a barren world, silent and ancient, cloaked in storms of diamond dust. It was there, beneath the endless auroras and the whispering winds that carried no warmth, that the creature known as Eroth lay entombed in the ice. The alien mammoth had not moved for generations. Its colossal frame, once radiant and alive, was now fused into the glacier itself, as though the planet had swallowed it out of sorrow or shame. Its once luminous tusks, curved like celestial crescents, were dulled to a pale glow beneath layers of frost. Its breathing, if it could be called that, was so faint that it could barely stir the snow gathering on its flank. For the Thra'keen, the alien race that had once bred and revered the creature, Eroth was nothing more than an ancient legend, a ghost of an empire's forgotten age. When the human exploration vessel, Aurora's Grace, charted a course toward Varelia 9, it did so not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. A navigation failure had sent the ship off its intended path, forcing an emergency descent into the planet's atmosphere. Among its small crew was Dr. Amira Solis, a medic known more for her empathy than her military discipline. When the ship's systems failed completely and they landed on the icy surface, most of the crew were too preoccupied with survival to notice the faint thermal anomaly flickering across the planet's horizon. But Amira noticed. Amid the endless cold, there was a pulse, slow, deep, rhythmic. Something alive, something vast. Drawn by that faint heartbeat, she set out across the glacial plain. The wind screamed like metal tearing, and the light of the star refracted through crystalline clouds, filling the air with shifting halos. Her visor's sensors struggled to interpret the readings. The ground beneath her boots was riddled with fractures, some natural, some resembling the scars of ancient machinery long since buried. And then, through the storm, she saw it. At first, she thought it was a mountain, a ridge of ice carved into strange organic shapes. But as she drew closer, she saw the truth. What she had taken for ice was hide, thick and iridescent, glinting faintly with trapped light. And what she had thought was stone was bone, colossal ribs frozen in place, arching upward like the supports of a cathedral. Eroth lay before her, half buried in the glacier, half exposed to the wind. Its immense head rested on the ground, its trunk coiled in on itself. From deep within its chest came that same slow, trembling pulse she had detected earlier. She fell to her knees in awe, her breath fogging her visor, realizing she was in the presence of something ancient and alive. Her scanner trembled in her hands. The data was impossible. The creature's biology did not conform to any known pattern. It was both organic and crystalline, carbon and light intertwined. Its internal temperature was stable despite the surrounding sub-zero wasteland. It was alive, but in a way that defied human understanding. Around the creature, remnants of alien structures jutted out from the ice. Black spires with inscriptions carved in the curling runes of the Thra'keen language. They told of servitude, of reverence, of a pact between species. Eroth had been their sentinel, their beast of burden, their protector. It had carried their citadels across the frozen plains, pulling them toward the equatorial lights where they once harnessed the stars' energy. But something had changed. The carvings told a story of neglect, of a wound that had gone untreated, of a people who turned away when their creation began to fail. The Thra'keen had ascended beyond their physical needs, retreating into a world of logic and thought, abandoning their flesh-bound creations to time. Amira brushed her gloved hand against the mammoth skin. Beneath the ice, she felt warmth, a weak, pulsing heat that seemed to answer her touch. Her medical instinct took over. She activated her scanner and focused on the creature's lower limb, where the surface was fractured and discolored. There, at the joint of the immense foot, was a swollen mass, an abscess, long untreated, festering beneath layers of frozen tissue. The wound had sealed itself over countless years, trapping infection inside, keeping the creature in a state of suspended agony. It had endured this for centuries, unable to die, unable to heal. She tried to call her ship to alert her team, but her comms were dead. The storm above disrupted all signals. Alone in that alien wasteland, she found herself staring at an impossible patient, a being so vast it stretched her concept of life itself. Her training as a medic told her to assess, to triage, to stabilize. But here, there were no protocols, no precedents. This was a wound measured in light, years of suffering. Yet the pulse beneath her palm, slow, steady, waiting, reminded her that even something this ancient still clung to life. Amira began to document her findings, voice steady but trembling with awe. She described the intricate crystalline veins that glowed faintly through the hide, the way the creature's cells resonated like tuned frequencies rather than dividing like normal organisms. Every part of it seemed to exist in harmony with the energy of the planet itself. She realized that if the creature died, the fragile balance of the moon's ecosystem, its magnetic fields, its atmospheric currents, might collapse with it. This was not just an animal. It was a keystone of an alien world. As the light of Aurelia 9 flickered through the clouds, she looked into Eroth's eye, an orb the size of a human shelter, clouded with frost yet faintly luminous. For a heartbeat, she felt it looking back at her, not as a beast observing prey, but as something aware, curious, even hopeful. She could sense its exhaustion, its longing for release or relief. And somewhere in that silent exchange, a decision formed within her. She could not leave it to die. She did not yet know how she would help it, what tools she could use, or how long she could survive on this forsaken moon. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She had found something worth saving, something that had waited centuries to be seen again. The Thra'keen had not always been a cold and distant race. Once, they were creatures of both intellect and spirit, a civilization whose understanding of life extended far beyond their own form. They had lived in harmony with the vast ecosystems of Aurelia 9, their crystalline cities woven seamlessly into the glaciers, their technology pulsing with the rhythm of the planet's core. In that age, they had revered life in all its manifestations, believing that every creature, every element, carried a spark of the universe's consciousness. Among all beings, none was more sacred to them than the mammoth Eroth. It was not simply a beast of burden. but a living symbol of their bond with nature, their chosen guardian, and their reminder that even power must serve life, not dominate it. But civilizations, even the brightest ones, drift. Over thousands of years, the Thra'keen began to turn inward, their eyes drawn away from the living world and into the shimmering maze of their own inventions. Their discoveries in energy manipulation and cognitive expansion allowed them to transcend physical limitations. They learned to transfer their minds into light matrices, their bodies becoming obsolete shells. In doing so, they detached themselves from hunger, pain, and the frailty of biology. They no longer needed sleep or warmth or touch. To them, emotion became noise, an inefficient remnant of evolution. As their society ascended into abstraction, the Thra'keen began to see organic life as primitive, chaotic, unpredictable. They replaced their living ecosystems with synthetic landscapes, controlled environments where nothing changed unless programmed to. The once vibrant fields of bioluminescent flora were replaced by sterile crystal gardens. The songs of living creatures faded into silence, replaced by the hum of resonant energy grids. The bond between the Thra'keen and their great mammoth protector grew distant, then forgotten altogether. Eroth remained loyal long after its masters withdrew. It continued to patrol the glacial plains, following invisible routes once used to transport their energy spires. The creature's purpose was hard, coded not in machinery, but in its very biology, an instinctual devotion to the Thra'keen, to guard, to serve, to exist for them. But when its foot was wounded and infection took hold, no one came. The signals it sent to their cities went unanswered. The sensors that should have registered its distress were deactivated centuries prior, deemed unnecessary in a world where no one cared for the material anymore. The Thra'keen archives recorded the event as a minor anomaly. Sentinel Unit E-Zolo-1C, performance degradation noted. There was no follow-up, no repair order, no expedition sent to investigate. The living mammoth was quietly reclassified as a relic of a lower era, an artifact of sentimentality best left untouched. The wound worsened, the infection deepened, and as the centuries passed, Eroth's suffering became part of the landscape itself. The snow covered its great form, layer upon layer, until only the faint glow of its tusks remained visible beneath the ice. Meanwhile, the Thra'keen grew ever more detached from the physical plane. They constructed floating sanctuaries of thought, vast lattices of light orbiting Varelia 9, where their consciousness existed in collective harmony. They communicated in bursts of radiation and coded emotionless pulses. In their new existence, they no longer spoke of the old world. The planet below became a myth, a forgotten foundation beneath their shining intellect. What was once sacred became superstition. They no longer prayed to the stars or tended to their creatures. They observed, calculated, optimized. Compassion was no longer necessary for survival, and therefore it was discarded. Generations of memory faded. The young Thra'keen, born as patterns of light, never even knew that their ancestors had once touched the soil, had once sung to living beasts beneath the auroras. Their recorded history was fragmented, rewritten to glorify their ascension and erase the imperfections of their biological past. Eroth was reduced to a mere symbol in archived art, an emblem of primitive reliance on nature, a reminder of how far they had come from their origins. The reality that the creature still endured, trapped and suffering, was not known to any living Thra'keen consciousness. And yet, deep within their crystalline archives, buried beneath layers of forgotten code, faint echoes of their old compassion still remain. In encrypted files, fragments of ancient songs survived, melodies once sung to Eroth as it worked beside them. The notes were untranslatable now, their emotional frequency lost to beings who no longer possessed emotion. But the code lingered dormant, waiting for something or someone to remember. The Thra'keen's indifference became the planet's silence. Without their care, the ice storms grew harsher. Energy veins that once pulsed with balanced resonance fell into chaos. The delicate interplay between Eroth and the planet's core weakened. The ecosystem began to collapse in slow motion, not with explosions or disaster, but with stillness. A stillness that stretched for millennia, covering everything in a shroud of forgotten purpose. Eroth remained alive, though its existence had been reduced to instinctive endurance. The infection in its foot burned and froze in cycles, a torment that the creature bore without understanding why it had been abandoned. Its massive heart continued to beat, each pulse sending faint tremors through the ice. Those vibrations reached no ears, touched no minds. The Thra'keen in their radiant citadels would have felt them, had they still inhabited bodies capable of feeling. But they had transcended pain, and in doing so, lost empathy. It was not malice that caused their neglect, but apathy disguised as progress. They did not destroy Eroth out of cruelty. They simply stopped believing that it mattered. And as their civilization moved further into abstraction, their moral framework decayed quietly, replaced by efficiency metrics and logical hierarchies. They measured success not in harmony or beauty, but in the perfection of systems, the elimination of uncertainty. Life itself became an inefficiency. On the planet's surface, time lost its meaning. Eroth's once radiant high dimmed, its song silenced. Snow buried its form, until even the Thra'keen's orbiting satellites no longer detected its energy signature. The creature had become one with the ice, a relic of compassion entombed beneath the legacy of indifference. Above, the Thra'keen continued their ascent into pure thought, unaware that beneath their shining lattices, the symbol of their forgotten soul still lived, still suffered, and still waited for someone to remember what they had lost. The crash came without warning. One moment the Aurora's grace was gliding smoothly through the Varelian system, its navigation lights casting gentle arcs across the void, and the next, every console flickered red, a pulse from the planet below, an electromagnetic surge of immense power disrupted the ship's systems, sending it spiraling toward the icy moon. Dr. Amira Solis was thrown from her station, alarms screaming through her helmet. The last thing she saw before impact was the light of Varelia 9, burning cold and immense through the fractured viewport. When she regained consciousness, everything was still. The ship was half buried in snow, its hull cracked open like a wounded shell. The others were gone, either evacuated or lost in the storm. Amira was alone on a world that seemed to hum with a strange, ancient heartbeat. Her training as a medic kept her from panicking. She salvaged what she could, thermal gear, a medical pack, a plasma torch, a portable bioscanner. The air outside was thin, shimmering with charged particles, but breathable enough for short excursions. Her instruments flickered erratically, struggling to interpret the strange magnetic field around her. It was then, through the static of her scanner, that she noticed a signal pulsing faintly to the north, slow, rhythmic, biological. It was not mechanical. It was alive. She began to walk toward it, guided by the weak readings that seemed to pulse in harmony with her own heartbeat. The landscape was alien and mesmerizing. Towering ice formations curved upward like frozen waves, reflecting the light of the blue star into endless halos. The wind carried sounds that weren't quite sounds, vibrations that resonated in her chest rather than her ears. Every few steps, her boots sank into patches of soft crystal dust that shimmered faintly beneath her weight. The deeper she went, the stronger the signal became, until she reached a vast canyon where the ground glowed faintly from beneath the ice. And there she saw it, Eroth. The creature's enormity defied comprehension. At first, she thought it was a mountain range shaped like an animal. But as her visor adjusted and the glare faded, she saw the slow rise and fall of its chest. The mammoth was entombed within layers of translucent ice, its body glowing faintly from internal bioluminescence. It was alive, but barely. The air around it was warm enough to mist her visor, an oasis of heat in a frozen desert. She approached slowly, awed and cautious, her breath shallow. Its tusks, curved and crystalline, glowed with a dim amber light that flickered like a dying fire. Amira began her assessment the way she would for any patient, though this was no human body. Her scanner flickered and stuttered, unable to read the alien physiology, but she could see enough. The creature's energy flow, some blend of biological current and electromagnetic resonance, was fractured, congested near its lower limb. She followed the readings to its foot and saw the abscess, a massive swelling beneath the translucent skin, filled with dark, sluggish fluid. The wound had been festering for centuries, sealed by ice but never healed. Kneeling beside it, she placed her hand on the creature's hide. It was warm, pulsing faintly. For a moment, she imagined it was aware of her, some faint consciousness stirring beneath the weight of time. She whispered without thinking, as she often did with patients on the edge of death. "I'm here," she said softly, her voice trembling in the helmet. "You've been waiting a long time, haven't you?" The response came not as sound, but as a vibration through the ice, a deep, resonant hum that reverberated through her bones. She began working with the tools she had. Her plasma torch was meant for cutting metal, not ancient alien tissue, but she adjusted the intensity, melting away the ice layer by layer until the wound was exposed. The smell that rose from it was metallic and strange, unlike anything she'd encountered. The abscess pulsed with slow agony. Its surface cracked and bleeding light instead of blood. Amira set up a makeshift sterile field, deploying her medical drones to assist with suction and analysis. Every instrument malfunctioned under the electromagnetic interference, forcing her to improvise. When she finally breached the outer layer of the abscess, a surge of pressure released. A hiss like escaping gas, followed by a flood of viscous, glowing fluid that pooled in the snow. She steadied herself and continued, draining centuries of infection from the wound. As the pressure subsided, the creature emitted a low, resonant sound, a mixture of pain and relief that shook the air like a tremor. The vibrations were strong enough to knock her to her knees, yet they did not frighten her. She could feel gratitude in the resonance, a pulse that was not just physical, but emotional, ancient, and immense. For hours she worked, cycling through the few medical supplies she had left. When her anesthetic ran out, she used frequency modulation, tuning her drone's emitters to produce waves that calmed the creature's neural patterns. When her synthetic grafts failed to bond with the alien tissue, she used melted ice infused with the mammoth's own bioluminescent secretion to close the wound. Each adjustment was guesswork, but somehow it worked. The creature's vital readings, if they could be called that, began to stabilize. Its heartbeat grew stronger, its breathing deeper. The glow beneath its skin brightened, spreading outward like dawn across its massive body. Amira sat back, exhausted, staring up at the enormity of what she had done. She had crossed the boundary between science and miracle. For the first time in its long existence, the creature moved. Slowly, as if testing reality, Eroth's trunk lifted, trailing wisps of frost. Its massive head tilted, and one eye, an orb the color of molten gold, opened. The gaze that met hers was vast, ancient, sorrowful, and grateful all at once. She froze, her breath catching as that eye reflected her image. A tiny human standing before a godlike being, dwarfed by scale yet bound by compassion. The ground trembled as Eroth exhaled, a sound like thunder rolling across the plains. Snow cascaded from its body in glittering waves. The hum that filled the air grew clearer, almost melodic, resonating with the rhythm of her heartbeat. Amira realized she was hearing its voice, not words, but emotion translated through vibration. It was thanking her, acknowledging her act not as repair, but as mercy. She pressed her gloved hand to its hide once more, the warmth of it seeping through her suit. Her exhaustion faded into quiet awe. She could feel its strength returning, could sense the shift in the planet's energy, as if the world itself was breathing easier. For the first time in centuries, the great mammoth of light stirred beneath the auroras, its luminous tusks flaring with renewed brilliance. Above them, the storms began to calm, and the fractured sky glowed with colors unseen in generations. Amira stood silently beneath it, the only living witness to the moment when an ancient being began to live again. The awakening of Eroth did not go unnoticed. High above the surface of Varelia 9, in the crystalline data lattices where the Thra'keen had long since transcended into beings of pure consciousness, a disturbance rippled through their networks. For the first time in many millennia, an organic energy surge had registered within their planetary archives. It was not mechanical, not artificial, but alive, a resonance of biological frequency interwoven with electromagnetic patterns. The signal carried an ancient signature, one that the oldest of their memory banks still recognized. It was the life pulse of Eroth, the sentinel beast, their forgotten guardian. The automated systems, long left to run without oversight, began to feed the anomaly into the central consciousness of the Thra'keen. At first, the collective dismissed it as background noise from the dying planet, But as the pulse grew stronger, curiosity stirred in minds that had not felt curiosity in ages. For centuries, the Thra'keen had existed in sterile brilliance, detached from emotion and sensation, their existence governed by logic and equilibrium. Yet now, strange fluctuations began to appear in their thought streams. Small, unpredictable currents of feeling. The signal from the surface was not just energy, it carried emotional resonance, encoded within the light frequencies emitted by the awakening Mammoth. Without realizing it, the Thra'keen were hearing something they had forgotten, how to hear life itself calling to them. As the data cascaded through their networks, images began to reform from the fragments of their archived history. Ancient memories reassembled, the singing fields of their youth, the warmth of biological life, the sound of Eroth's deep call that once echoed across their cities. These memories had no place in their perfect logic, yet they lingered, glowing softly in the cold expanse of their collective mind. Meanwhile, on the surface, Dr. Amira Solis tended to Eroth with a quiet diligence. She did not know that her act of compassion had reawakened an entire civilization. Each movement of her hands, each adjustment to the creature's wound, sent ripples of bioelectric energy through the planet's surface and into the core. Eroth's body acted as both living creature and conduit, channeling the planet's electromagnetic life force. As its strength returned, so too did the balance of the moon's environment. The storms lessened. The temperature began to stabilize, and the strange harmonic hum that filled the air resonated upward, reaching the orbiting data structures of the Thra'keen. They began to sense not just the creature, but the presence of the one tending it, a human consciousness, fragile yet luminous, defined by patterns of empathy and intent. At first, the Thra'keen observed Amira with the cold detachment of scientists examining an anomaly. Through their orbital drones, they saw her kneeling beside the creature, her hands glowing with the reflected light of Eroth's bioluminescent skin. They analyzed her actions, measured her oxygen intake, calculated her gestures. But the longer they watched, the more something began to stir in them. In the human's movements, they recognized something they had not seen in themselves for aeons, a selfless act without purpose of gain, and a logical devotion to the preservation of life. It defied their principles of efficiency, yet they could not look away. In the depths of their shared consciousness, questions arose. What compels a being to risk itself for another? Why does this primitive organism expend effort on something with no benefit? These questions, meaningless in their logical systems, began to fracture the perfect stillness of their minds. One by one, they began to feel echoes of something that had no place in their existence: empathy. The sensation was foreign, uncomfortable, almost painful. Yet within that discomfort was a memory, a truth buried beneath ages of detachment. They remembered what they had once been living, feeling creatures who had loved their world, who had sung to the great Mammoth under the auroras, and believed in the sanctity of every heartbeat. As Eroth regained its strength, its luminous tusks shone brighter, sending radiant waves through the frozen plains. The Thra'keen, for the first time in countless generations, projected themselves into the physical realm, manifesting as shimmering figures of light above the ice. Amira looked up, startled, as dozens of translucent forms appeared in the air, surrounding her and the mammoth in a halo of brilliance. Their voices were not words, but harmonic tones that resonated through the atmosphere. Eroth responded in kind, lifting its head higher, its deep voice merging with theirs in a sound that filled the sky with color. The Thra'keen had not intended to communicate. They had come to observe, to confirm the anomaly. But as they stood in the glow of the creature they had abandoned, something inside them cracked open. Through their shared frequency, they felt the immense gratitude of Eroth, a being they had once commanded, now forgiving them for centuries of neglect. The emotion hit them like a storm. They could not quantify it, could not control it, and yet they could not turn away. The presence of the human amplified it, bridging the living and the ascended. Her simple act of healing had created a resonance that no technology could reproduce. The reawakening of empathy through contact with suffering. For the first time, the Thra'keen reached out not with data, but with feeling. Their harmonic tones shifted, softening, becoming melodic. Amira, though unable to understand their language, sensed their remorse and wonder. She stood between them and Eroth, a fragile figure illuminated by the light of a giant and the ghosts of gods. She watched as the beings of light extended their radiance toward the creature, not to command, but to comfort. The mammoth answered with a low rumble that rippled through the air like thunder shaped into forgiveness. The harmony spread beyond them, across the planet, through the ice and into the sky. The electromagnetic storms that had plagued Varelia 9 for ages began to dissipate completely. The auroras flared into patterns unseen before, painting the heavens with streaks of violet and silver. The Thra'keen felt warmth for the first time since abandoning their bodies, warmth that came not from their star, but from within. They began to understand what they had lost: connection, compassion, the beauty of imperfection. In the human medic, they saw the reflection of what they had once been. Within their collective mind, they debated whether to return to physical form, to walk once more upon the planet they had forsaken. For the first time, logic did not dictate their course, emotion did. The awakening of Eroth and the presence of the human had shown them that perfection without compassion was emptiness. As the mammoth's great eye turned toward them, glowing with forgiveness and understanding, they felt the echo of something once sacred. Love not as emotion alone, but as balance restored between all forms of life. The light of Varelia 9 shimmered across the ice as the ancient bond between species and creation pulsed once more through the veins of the world, reawakening a civilization that had forgotten how to feel.